Hello everybody. Today we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. What term must be added to x squared minus 10x to make it a perfect square trinomial? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take our first term and we're going to put it in the first box. Now I want this box right here to be a perfect square. I do not want it to be a rectangle. The difference between a square and a rectangle is that in a square, all the sides are the same. So if I want this side length to be the same as this side length, then that would mean that I need to divide my middle term by 2. Negative 10x divided by 2 is negative 5x. Next, I'm going to find the greatest common factor in each row and in each column. The greatest common factor between x squared and negative 5x is x. The greatest common factor between x squared and negative 5x is x. X times what number would give us a negative 5x? Negative 5. X times what number would give us a negative 5x? Negative 5. So now we are going to learn how to complete this square, quite literally. I want to know what number goes here to complete the square. Well, to figure that out, we're going to multiply negative 5 by negative 5. And when we do that, we get 25. Let me use a different color for that. So 25 is the number that completes the square. That is a number that we add onto the end. What we just did is we just factored x squared minus 10x plus 25. And when we factored it, we got x minus 5 times x minus 5. I can write x minus 5 times x minus 5 as a perfect square binomial by writing it as x minus 5 squared. So the number that completes the square is 25, and then the perfect square binomial is x minus 5 squared. We are going to be using this process to solve quadratic equations. And you can see an example of that down here. So step 1 is you want to isolate the variables so that your x's are on one side of your equation and your number or your constant is on the other side. So in x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0, my first step is to add 1 to both sides. That way I have just my x's on the left side of the equation and my constant of 1 on the other side of the equation. Step 2 is to set up the blanks. What you add to one side to complete the square must be added to the other because we have an equation. And then you'll see this box here of the process of completing the square, just like how we learned on this first example. In this problem, when you complete the square, they got 4. So you're going to add 4 to both sides of the equation. And that is what they did right here. Now you can see that we have factored x squared plus 4x plus 4. And when we factor that, we got x plus 2 times x plus 2, which is the same thing as x plus 2 squared. 1 plus 4 is 5. To undo the square, they took the square root of both sides. and then solving for x, they got the answer of x equals negative 2 minus the square root of 5 and x equals negative 2 plus the square root of 5. If you'd like, you could also just leave your answer just like this, as x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 5. So this example was done out for us, so let's try one on our own. So my first step is to get my x's on one side and my numbers on the other. So in x squared plus 24x plus 100 equals 56, my first step is going to be to subtract 100 from both sides. And so I'll bring down my x squared and my 24x. 56 minus 100 is negative 44. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to set up your blanks. So plus blank, plus blank. In the blanks, that is where I will put the number that completes the square. I have to add it to both sides because what I do to one side, I must do to the other because I have an equation. From here, we want to complete the process of completing the square. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my square. First term goes in the first box. And so I want this to be a square and not a rectangle, meaning I want this side length to be the same as this side length. So to do that, I'm going to have to divide this term by 2. 24x divided by 2 is 12x. The greatest common factor between x squared and 12x is x. The greatest common factor between x squared and 12x is x. X times 12 would give me a 12x here, and x times 12 would give me a 12x here. Now I can complete the square by multiplying 12 by 12. 12 times 12 is 144. So 144 is the missing number that completes the square. That is the number that I am going to add to both sides of my equation. We have just factored x squared plus 24x equals 144. And when we did that, we got x plus 12 times x plus 12, which is the same thing as saying x plus 12 squared. Negative 44 plus 144 is 100. So now we are on step 9, which is solve for x. So to undo the square, I am going to take the square root. The square root undoes the square and leaves me with x plus 12. Whenever you take the square root of a number, it's always plus or minus. The square root of 100 is 10. From here, I have two equations to solve. X plus 12 equals positive 10, and x plus 12 equals negative 10. I have one equation for the plus sign, so for the positive 10, and I have another equation for the minus sign, so for the negative 10. So one for the plus 10 and one for the minus 10. From here, I can solve each equation. To undo addition, I'll do subtraction and get x equals negative 2. To undo addition, I'll do subtraction and get x equals negative 22. So I have two solutions, and those two solutions are negative 2 and negative 22. Let's try the same thing on example 3. First things first is that I want to get my x's on one side of the equation and my numbers on the other side. So this 10x needs to move to this side of the equation. And I know that negative 96 is a constant, so I'm going to want it on the other side. It's negative, so to move it to the other side, I'm going to have to add it. Now, if you prefer to do this in 2 different steps, you 100% can do that. X squared and 10x are not like terms, so I'm just going to write them side by side. Negative 96 plus 96 is 0. I'm going to bring down my equal sign. Negative 10x plus 10x is 0. And then I'm going to bring down my 96. So that's step 1. Have your variables on one side and your constant on the other. Step 2 is to set up your blanks. So plus blank, plus blank. What you add to one side to complete the square, you must add to the other because you have an equation. Now we're ready to complete the square. So I'm going to draw a box, or more accurately, a square. First term goes in the first box. We want this number to be this shape to be a square and not a rectangle. So we gotta divide this middle term by 2. Split it evenly between these 2 boxes. 10x divided by 2 is 5x. The greatest common factor between x squared and 5x is x. The greatest common factor between x squared and 5x is x. X times 5 would give me a 5x here, and x times 5 would give me a 5x here. Now I can complete the square because I know that 5 times 5 is 25. So 25 is that missing number that completes the square. That is the number that I am going to add to both sides of my equation. We have just factored x squared plus 10x x squared plus 10x plus 25. And when we did that, we got x plus 5 times x plus 5, which is the same thing as x plus 5 squared. 96 plus 25 is 121. From here, we can solve for x. To undo the square, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. The square root undoes the square and leaves me with x plus 5. Whenever you take the square root of a number, it's always plus or minus. The square root of 121 is 11. From here, I have 2 equations. I have x plus 5 equals 11, and I have x plus 5 equals negative 11. I have one equation for the positive 11, and I have another equation for the negative 11. So one for the positive 11 and one for the negative 11. To undo addition, I'll do subtraction and get x equals 6. To undo addition, I'll do subtraction and get x equals negative 16. So I have 2 solutions, 6 and negative 16. If we look at the next example, here my first thing that I want to do is I want to get my x's on one side and my constants on the other. This negative 4x squared needs to be moved to the other side. So to undo subtraction, I'll do addition. I can also see that I'm going to need to move this 58. So I'm also going to subtract 58 from both sides. when I do that, I get negative 3x squared plus 4x squared is 1x squared. I'm going to bring down my 18x. 58 minus 58 is 0. I'm going to bring down my equal sign. Negative 4x squared plus 4x squared is 0. Negative 2 minus 58 is negative 60. My next step is to set up my blanks. So plus blank, plus blank. From here, I want to complete the square. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a square. First term goes in the first box. I want this to be a square and not a rectangle, so I need to cut this in half. 18x divided by 2 is 9x. The greatest common factor between x squared and 9x is x. The greatest common factor between x squared and 9x is x. X times 9 is 9x, and x times 9 is 9x. Now I can find the number that completes the square. 9 times 9 is 81. 81 is the number that completes the square. We have just factored x squared plus 18x plus 81. And when we did that, we got x plus 9 times x plus 9, which is x plus 9 squared. Negative 60 plus 81 is 21. To undo the square, I'm going to take the square root of both sides and get x plus 9 is equal to. Whenever you take the square root of a number, it's always plus or minus. The square root of 21 is not a perfect square, so you need to simplify this square root. I like to use the birthday cake to simplify. The smallest prime number that goes into 21 is 3. 3 goes into 21 7 times. The smallest prime number that goes into 7 is 7. 7 goes into 7 one time. When you get to 1, you're done. That's the candle to your cake. Now I'm looking at these two outside numbers. Are they a pair? No, there are no pairs here. So because there are no pairs, that means the square root of 21 is as simplified as it's going to get. From here, I have two equations. I have x plus 9 equals a positive square root of 21, and I have x plus 9 equals a negative square root of 21. To undo addition, I'm going to do subtraction. So I'm going to bring down my x. 9 minus 9 is 0. Bring down my equal sign. 21, or the square root of 21 and negative 9, these are not like terms. So I'm going to write them side by side. In math, we always write the constant before we write the radical. So you always want to write your number and then the square root symbol. And that's just so that you don't that is because sometimes you can mistakenly make the square root symbol longer. And so you might think minus 9 is underneath the square root symbol. So to avoid that error, instead we always write the number first and then the square root. I'm going to do the same thing with this one over here. So I'm going to subtract 9 on both sides and get x equals negative 9 minus the square root of 21. So these are both your answers. Oops, let's fix that. If you'd like, you could also write your answer as x equals negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 21. And this just lets the reader know that you have two answers. One where you're adding the square root of 21, and one where you are subtracting the square root of 21.